Hi YouTube! Today I want to talk about one of my favorite plants, a really popular plant, the MONSTERA deliciosa. I think this plant got a lot of people into houseplants because they're so beautiful. They have these huge leaves with these giant fenestrations. They're so interesting looking and they grow really fast, so they can take up a huge space in your home. So it's definitely one of the plants that really got me into collecting houseplants. I've had different houseplants over the years, but I've never really been into them until the last probably like year and a half. I started getting a lot of houseplants like everyone else. So I wanted to talk about the MONSTERA, how I take care of it, and really just show you that it's a super easy plant that I think anybody can handle if you just follow simple care advice and yeah, just take care of your little plant baby and it'll reward you with lots of giant leaves. So, a little bit about the MONSTERA deliciosa. I think they're native to Mexico and Hawaii. They grow in kind of like jungly rainforest type habitat. They have these aerial roots that can climb up trees, so if you saw them in nature, they'd be growing way up on trees, and the leaves at the top would be bigger and have more fenestrations, so those are the little slits in the leaves. The fenestrations are to help sunlight reach the lower leaves, so the lower leaves actually don't have any fenestrations at all. This is a little baby MONSTERA, so these are just kind of like cute heart-shaped leaves. They don't start getting the fenestrations until they're more mature. Like, I don't know if you can see, like this guy has fenestrations, these little slits. And the more mature they get, the more fenestrations they'll have. They'll have these little holes right here when they get way bigger. Mine does not have those secondary little holes yet, but I'm patiently waiting. If you want your MONSTERA to grow tall, you can put a moss pole in it and the aerial roots will grab onto the moss pole and climb up. Otherwise, like mine is just growing out really wide and I actually need to figure something out for it because it's starting to get out of control. As far as light goes, I give my MONSTERA pretty direct light. I have it in a little kitchen nook and it's on the middle of my table taking up all the space, but I have a window facing south and a window facing east. And it's getting light from both directions pretty much at all times. Mine does really well with direct light. I have not had any issues really with browning leaves or sun damage. It seems to really like the light. It's actually in this spot right here where it stays. So above, I'm putting a grow light into my little fixture just to give it some extra light. I live in the Pacific Northwest and it's pretty dark and gloomy for the next few months. So yeah, as far as light goes, I think they're pretty tolerant because I have had them in other places. This little baby is in my kitchen window. That's a south-facing window and it seems to be doing well there. And I used to have this one in my living room near a south-facing window, but didn't get as much light. And it did fine there too. It was putting out new growth. So I think they're pretty tolerant. I just find that when I give it more light, I get better growth and more fenestrations. So I try to give it as much light as I possibly can. As far as temperature and humidity goes, I'm not someone who monitors mine a lot. My house doesn't get under 60 degrees and it's usually a little bit warmer than that no matter what time of year it is. But in the winter it does get pretty dry in my house. We have a wood stove and it tends to dry out. So I do run a couple of humidifiers near some of my plants just to keep the humidity up through the winter. I don't really mist my plants, mostly because I can't figure out for sure if it's doing anything or not. There's a lot of debate online whether it works or it doesn't. So I just run a humidifier near my plants and I at least know that that works. For watering my MONSTERA, actually maybe I should talk about how it's potted first because these will tie together. So I prefer to pot them in terracotta. I pot most things in terracotta because it helps to absorb some of the moisture and that way you're not worried about root rot. I'd rather water more often and have the soil dry out faster. So I also use well-draining soil for all of my plants just so that I can monitor it a lot better. If you have like dense soil that's not going to drain very well, there's a good chance that your plant's going to be sitting in water, especially if you have it in a pot like a ceramic pot that the water's not able to kind of get wicked out of like it does with a terracotta. And MONSTERAs are prone to root rot, so I would be very careful making sure that you have well-draining soil and you're planting it in something like a terracotta unless you have a really light hand for watering. But I just personally, I kind of like drench my plants when I water them. I water them thoroughly and then let them dry out almost entirely. Especially with the Monstera, I actually do let mine dry out entirely, and then on the day that it's entirely dried out, I will drench it again. The way that I water my Monstera, because my big one is actually so big that I stopped putting it in a terracotta pot. It was just too big and too heavy that I experimented, and I now have it in a grow bag, and I really like it. The grow bag helps to, it doesn't really get as root bound because the plant, something like, I'm not gonna be able to explain this well actually, but you can Google it. It does something to help it not get root bound. I can actually feel the roots though through the bag, which is pretty cool. But it's so thin and the like moisture doesn't get trapped in there. It's probably even better than a terracotta because the water just like evaporates out, and I can water it again if it needs to and it needs to dry out. But yeah, I've actually been really liking this grow bag, and I think I'm gonna do this with some other plants and just see how that goes. So far so good. It has handles on it, so it's easy for me. Even though it's heavy and big and awkward, I can still just carry it. And that leads into watering. Up until now, I've always just top watered and just kind of like drenched them through, dumped out anything that's in the tray and called it good. But I have been bottom watering since it's in this grow bag. I just fill the bathtub and I dunk it and I leave it for half an hour to an hour, pull it out and just let it kind of drain. I actually put it on top of the toilet and I let it drain into the toilet so that the water comes out. That wouldn't work with a smaller plant, but it's like the perfect size, so that's what I do. I probably, right now, in the summertime, I'm probably watering about once a week or so. I don't really have it on a schedule, but I do notice that it pretty much falls on my days off that I end up watering, so it's about every week. This time of year, it's winter here, and I probably water it every like 10 or so days, but I definitely don't recommend following a schedule for watering. At least with any of the plants I have, I prefer to just check the soil, see if it's dry, check for signs like drooping leaves, curling leaves, things like that in my plants, and then I just water when they need it. I think that if you follow a schedule, there's so many different factors that can kind of affect when they need water that you'll end up under or over watering unintentionally. I do fertilize mine like once or twice a month in the summer when it's growing like crazy. And then if I notice growth throughout the winter, I still will fertilize once in a while at like half strength. This is what I use for fertilizer. I also plant all my plants in worm castings, so they're going to be getting some like natural fertilizer from the worm castings all the time anyways. And I top dress them. If I haven't repotted in a while, I'll kind of like top dress with the worm castings and mix it into the top couple layers. That way when I'm watering, it's getting more nutrients from the worm castings. And with the worm castings, I have never had my plants get burned like they could with other chemical fertilizers. So I think it's a great way to give some food to your plants without having to worry about over or under fertilizing them. And I do the worm castings year round. I just mix it into my potting soil. For potting mix for Monsteras, what I do is I mix peat moss, perlite, and worm castings together, and I just get them to the consistency that I like, heavy on the perlite because it helps with draining. And I just make my own for the most part. If I'm out and I don't want to get all the supplies, then I'll just buy the black gold with worm castings and use that. I do mix perlite into the black gold though, because otherwise I find that it's too dense. For propagating Monsteras, they're actually super easy. I don't like to chop mine up that much, but I actually did recently take a cutting. So this is what it looks like. It has a little root growing right now. You just cut below the node, so this right here, where the two leaves split. The new leaf comes out here, and sometimes there's an aerial root. Just this like kind of bulgy spot, that's the node, and that's where you would cut under. Most people recommend cutting a couple inches below the node, that way if it starts rotting you can cut that part off, but I don't usually do that. I haven't had any issues with a Monstera cutting rotting. I start them for my friends and they've all rooted really easily. For repotting, I recommend repotting your Monstera as soon as it needs to be. So for me, that's pretty frequently. My Monstera is pushing out literally like 4 leaves at any given time. Every time I look at it, there's 4 new leaves. And I do have a couple I don't actually know how many actual plants are in this pot. There probably are quite a few, which is why it's putting out so many leaves all the time. But they will grow into whatever container you give them. So the bigger the container, the bigger your plant is going to grow. And some people do kind of try to keep them in a smaller container or repot less often because they want to stunt the growth, because they can get out of control and just like take over your living space, which I'm more than fine with. Like, I would love to live in a jungle of Monstera, so that's fine by me. But yeah, I mean, if you want it to grow big, I would recommend repotting every few months, and if you want to keep it smaller, maybe wait a little bit between repotting. On the topic of repotting, I personally don't break up the roots unless I absolutely have to, and that's really with any plant. I don't like to break up the roots because I think that it can send the plant into shock. I personally just take the plant out, dust off as much of the existing dirt as possible without really like messing with the roots, and I just plop it in the new container and fill around it, and the roots will find their way out. So that's what I do, and it works really well for me. I don't find that the growth is really stunted when I repot. It seems to just pick up where it left off. For cleaning the leaves, I use diluted neem oil. I just spray them down, wipe them with a cloth, like paper towel or microfiber cloth or something. I just wipe every single leaf, top and bottom. I do spray the top of the soil with neem oil too, because it helps to reduce having any pests. The only pests that I have ever dealt with in any of my plants are fungus gnats. And I've pretty much just accepted that fungus gnats live in my house because no matter what I do, there's always a couple of them. I found that sand works really well if you just do a layer of sand on the top, but honestly, they don't do that much damage as long as the population doesn't get out of control, so I've kind of just accepted that bugs are a part of my life. But yeah, so far I haven't had any other bugs. I routinely wipe down all my leaves on all my plants with neem oil, and it's been just fine. The smell does not bother me. Everybody says it's like the worst smell in the world, and they're so disgusted by it, and I don't know what's wrong with me, but my roommate also does not think that they smell that bad, or that it smells that bad. So that's what I do. Keeps the leaves really nice and shiny. You want to keep your leaves clean so that they can photosynthesize and absorb as much sun as possible. You don't want a layer of dust on top of the leaves that blocks the sun. One last thing that I do want to add is that they are toxic to pets and people. So if you have little kids or pets that are going to mess with your plants, that's definitely something to consider before bringing one home. I think that pretty much covers how I take care of my Monstera. Like I said, everyone has different ways of doing things, and I just kind of want to say what works for me and maybe help you or give you a little confidence that they're really easy plants and you can have one even if you're a beginner. They're not hard. They're honestly so easy, so rewarding. They grow so fast. They're readily available. They're not that expensive unless you're getting like an Albo or a Thai Constellation or something like that. But start with just regular green Monstera. The other ones are harder to take care of. I don't have one. They are hundreds of dollars, if not thousands. But they're super easy. I highly recommend that everyone get one. And yeah, if you have any other suggestions, feel free to drop a comment. Anything that you think works better or have anything that I missed, feel free to leave a comment. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you didn't like it, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you didn't like it, and I'll see you in the next one.